Well, g'day. Welcome to Stu's Shed. It's going to be an interesting day today. We're looking forward to doing this for quite a while. Now, we've all seen the SawStop being set off on a blade. We've seen how fast it goes. It's a very spectacular. Safety mechanism. But I've never seen it stop a dado blade. So that's what I've got for you today. I must admit, I've got a bit of trepidation. It's an interesting thought trying to stop that much metal that's spinning around. Not only that, but just the idea of trying to get it off the saw afterwards is going to be interesting as well, because it's as much as a single disc of steel, as in a 10-inch blade spinning around, can produce quite a thump. I don't know what to know. I just don't know what to expect with the 8-inch with a Dado set. It's going to be something interesting. Now, before we get started, a couple of things to go through. Firstly, and it's recommended in the box, and it makes perfect sense. The sort of Dado blade that you should be using this for is one of these ones here, where there's a couple of outside blades. Obviously, they've got it's a non-alternating top bevel, with one being the left, one being the right-hand side, and you have chipper blades in between. And something like this one, which has got just a couple of chippers on it, is highly recommended. If you get one of these other ones, such as I have here, where the chipper blades are an entire disc, it's a hefty amount of steel to try and stop. Now, in saying that, SawStop, probably could bring it up short. Oh, I'm sure it will. I mean, it would jam onto there and lock on. It may take a little bit longer to stop. The damage to you might be a little bit more. The main thing though is the damage to the machine trying to stop this much steel spinning is got a fair chance of doing some damage. Now, in saying that, it's a safety mechanism, and when you have a car accident and your airbag goes off, you're not so concerned the fact that you've just blown your steering wheel apart with the airbag coming out of it. You're more worried about the fact that the safety mechanisms actually worked and helped you. And I dare say it'll be the same here. If you were going to do a cut and you were going to do yourself some injury, better to bend the arbor on your saw, even if you have to replace that, than to suffer the injury. Now, we're not going to play around with this blade here. I've actually got no plans to ever use this one again. I've only used it once or twice just to see what it was like. And I tell you what, the saw struggled to even get this thing up to speed. There's that much steel when you pack in the two outside blades in all the spaces. So I just wanted to show you that one. This is a blade not to use. Probably pretty good practice not to use it anyway. Now, the other sort of blade, and I don't even have one to show you, is a wobble blade. This is a Dado blade that actually has deliberate run out and controllable amount of run out. So it oscillates from side to side to cut the width of cut the girth width that you're looking for. This is a blade that oscillates from side to side while it's running, with a dial-in amount of run out to cut the width curve that you're actually looking for. And again, it's an unusual concept. I can't see it as being a particularly good practice at the best of times, and again, certainly not something that you'd recommend using on a saw like this. But there are perfectly good examples of Dado blades out there. This one here is just a cheap and nasty that I'm going to sacrifice to the cause. I'm sure it's not that cheap. It's probably over $100 worth of Dado blade, even so. But I'm keeping my primary Dado blade, which is my Amana Tool Dado blade. Keeping that well and truly safe. Unless, of course, I go and put myself in harm's way, in which case all bets are off. Now, before I get started, I need to change the saw over. It's currently got the brake for the 10-inch blade, and I need to change it over to a Dado blade brake. Now, removing the existing brake is a very easy thing to do, especially when it hasn't been jammed onto a blade already. Now, I've obviously already removed the insert and removed the guard. So down here there is just a red knob. You just turn it 90 degrees clockwise, that pulls out. Now because this is a perfectly good brake, I'm going to be careful taking it off. And there we have it, that's a 10-inch blade brake, which is the one that we've all seen many times. Now what I have here is the SawStop 8-inch Dado cartridge. Now that is a substantial bit of brake there. If I put it up against the other one, we're talking a lot more. Obviously for a start it's got to actually reach further because the 8-inch Dado blade is further, it's going to be further away from the brake if you went on the 10-inch. But it's also got a much larger contact area there across to take into account the width of the blade. But again, it mounts exactly the same way. Let's get myself lined up. Pushes on, and then your red retaining lock goes on, and a quarter turn, lock that on. Now start stacking on the spacers. One more on. Okay, and it's all on. Now I'm just going to drop it down to a cutting height. Obviously the Dado blade doesn't cut full depth. You don't need it to cut through the timber. What you want is to be able to cut your Dado or your rabbit or your slot or whatever you want to call it. Now for this view, I'm actually going to leave the insert off the saw. Now obviously that's not an ideal way of operating a saw. You'd always want to operate it with an insert in place. But I'm leaving it off because I actually want to get that extra camera view looking down. Right, I'm almost set up ready to go. There's this one last thing I want to do. Now, I have here my human finger analogy. I went down to the supermarket especially for this. And I have here a couple of nice fresh frankfurts. Now as we've talked about in the past, the saw actually puts a small charge into the blade and it detects how that charge dissipates, and if it's going into something nice, big, salty, wet, like a human, then it picks up on that, and that's why the brake activates. And very simply, I'm not going to put a piece of me actually in the line of fire. Now, a piece of sausage on its own, or a frankfurt on its own, is not going to activate the saw unless I'm actually holding it, because that's then making conductivity through myself, and then all my mass is going to be detected by the safety mechanism. Now, one last thing I'm going to do before we actually go on to the actual SawStop is I've got my other table saw set up here, and I've got a Dado blade set up in it as well, around about the same width as what I have on the SawStop. This one obviously doesn't have that extra safety protection of the SawStop mechanism. And so we're going to do a cut just as if I was going to do a just any normal dado cut. With the sausage in the way, and I'll just show you just the sort of injury that you could actually sustain from a dado blade in a normal situation. Now, when you're standing at your saw and you're going to do a dado blade cut, now the dado blade, as I said before, is not full height, so you don't have that visual clue of the saw actually cutting through the timber, but that you can actually see where that line is drawing, and hopefully notice if it's actually drawing a bead on your body part. You just don't have that point of reference. And if you're standing, trying to guide a piece of timber through the saw, it would be very easy for you to just to make that slight mistake and having a finger or a hand extended out and not realise that it's in the line of fire until the saws actually come out the other side. And so that's where we're going to be holding our sausage on the other side of this piece of timber as I feed through the saw. Now, you may think that just wouldn't happen. As you're feeding the saw through, wouldn't you feel it touch? Wouldn't you feel the pain? But I can assure you that the speed that you normally feed timber through a blade, and I went a little bit slower then than I probably normally would, but by the time you've actually registered that you've started to cut yourself, I can assure you, it's absolutely too late. I mean, every single person who's ever done themselves an injury on a table saw will be able to tell you the same thing. By the time you've realised that you're actually causing yourself an injury, the game's already over. Now, let me show you what you'd actually see when you went down to the emergency department and presented yourself afterward. It's surprising. It's not torn, it's not shredded like I was expecting. It's a perfectly square-sided dado cut. And I have no doubt, after seeing that then, that if you did that to yourself, that's what you'd end up with. It's almost more shocking in a way how perfect the cut is. Nature doesn't build things in straight lines, and yet, there's a perfectly formed cavity. It would almost be worse seeing that in some ways, I imagine, than the having something like you'd expect. But my God, the damage that would cause is phenomenal. Okay, let's put this thing aside. It's a bit freaky. There we go, we have our perfectly good dado cut. Now I'm going to come across now to this saw, and we're going to do the same cut, this time on a new finger analogy. Right, so here we are, all set up to go. Now I'm actually going to drop the sausage in front in this case rather than behind, just simply because I don't have that insert in place. One way or the other, you'll still see what happens when the dado blade just touches the sausage, and therefore through my contact me. So just checking everything's set up ready to go. Wow, that was pretty impressive. I'm just looking, I can't even see where that dado blade touched the sausage. It is in perfect condition. It's spectacular seeing the SawStop drop it set itself off. It really is. It always is. But my goodness, that's a massive reaction. Every time you see that, it just blows your mind. Last job we've got to try and get this puppy apart. So let me just do that. Just going to bring the saw back up to full height and then to see how difficult it is going to be to actually get that blade off there. I imagine it's not going to be easy. But, you know, if that was me instead of a sausage, I'd be looking at myself going, thank goodness. But, as I said, my heart's still racing a bit after that one. It's whenever the SawStop goes off, it's quite spectacular, and in this case, that was almost more violent than I imagined. But SawStop, the sausage is safe. My fingers are safe. Okay. So far so good. The lock off. Now it's a matter of leveraging from the back and from the front to get the brake and the blade off together. There we go. It is beautifully embedded. Interestingly enough, how tight that was on, all the chippers are actually loose. They haven't sort of spun around or anything like that. So obviously I had it up the right amount of tightness on the arbor. So they're loose. Now I've got at least one chipper there. It's absolutely blown a tooth off it. I can see that. And there we go.